Since the introduction of games, there have been many different types. These differed for many different reasons. Firstly, we are going to see how the world affected the game. The different types of game world include 2D side-scrolling, these are found in games such as Mario and Starbound, and 3D open world, which can be found in games such as Grand Theft Auto and Skyrim. Firstly, 2D side-scrollers are very simplistic and therefore seem to be aimed at a lower aged audience. For example, Mario is one of the most iconic games to feature a side-scrolling environment. The world, being brightly coloured and cartoon-like, creates an easy and simplistic feel to the game, as there is only one way to go and not much detail in the background or foreground. This appears to the younger audience as less knowledge and skill is required to play it. However, 3D open world games such as Grand Theft Auto are aimed more at an older audience, as they are usually created for realism and contain little details to add to the visual effects of the game. The little details can include things such as water dripping off your character when he gets out of the sea or a river. These visual effects help to create a more lifelike feel to the game, essentially putting the player in the game. To add to this, the realism creates a sense of caution for the player, as they fear consequences and therefore change the way they play. Adding to world types, the genre of a game also impacts the way in which it can be played. This can massively affect the world of games with different genres. There are many variants of game genres, ranging from role-playing games to first-person shooters. All take a different look on their world. For example, multiplayer first-person shooters such as CSGO have a small open-world maps, which have a border. This is to improve the gameplay of the game, as it is confined and enclosed, making encounters more likely than if it was a giant open world. The realistic textures and detail of CSGO maps help to create a typical first-person shooter world, connecting the player to the game. However, the world genre can change without the game genre changing. This can be seen in Call of Duty Advanced Warfare. This similarly is a first-person shooter such as CSGO. However, the worlds, although confined and compact, differ from those realistic ones in CSGO. The worlds in Call of Duty take on a more science fiction feel to them due to where they are based. Unlike the realism of CSGO, Call of Duty worlds are set in the future, along with futuristic gameplay using exoskeletons for example. The gameplay and maps have to drastically change. This is done to keep the players, who are already into the Call of Duty series, hooked by making it seem as though it's a different game by giving it a different setting. The visual impacts and quality of a game can also affect the world and its environment. This can be shown in Terraria. The simplistic cubic graphics help to support the simplism of a 2D scrolling world. This makes the game user-friendly, as they can clearly see what they are doing. Although this type of visual style would not be seen to work in an open world, there are few exceptions such as Minecraft, which uses simplistic graphic styles with the complexity of large open world. More often, in open world games, the quality and visual effects are usually higher to produce greater impacts to buildings, adding to the realism of the game. For example, Assassin's Creed fulfills the accuracy and visual impact of realistic graphics. This again makes the player feel more enticed in the game, making them aware of what they can run up and what they can interact with. This creates a more recognisable world in that the player can almost feel the game, allowing them to parkour accordingly to how they perceive the world. The world of a game can also change over time. This can be triggered by an improvement of hardware. This improvement can change the world in many ways. One of these changes can be the size of the world. As older games were size restricted, as no available hardware could render it, now technology has massively improved. It has allowed for much larger worlds that can be explored extensively. This advanced technology can be shown in the progression of PlayStation 1 up to PlayStation 4. This progression has also introduced a massive increase in the visuals of a game world. Earlier games such as Spyro had very simplistic world visual quality, as it had little colour changes and shadows, whereas the PlayStation 4 has introduced much higher graphical impacts in games. This can be shown in The Last of Us. The very complex but beautiful world of The Last of Us has very high visual impacts, with a wide variety of colours. This increase in hardware has improved the gaming experience for the players, as they can relate to the world. Worlds could also be affected by what audience the game is aimed at. This can change the complexity and visual style of the game based on who it is aimed at. For example, Mario is a game mostly focused towards the younger audience. This can be portrayed through the world, as it is full of simplistic shapes and bright primary colours to suggest a fun and relaxed environment for the player. This heavily differs from a game such as Battlefield 3. Battlefield, a first-person shooter, is more aimed towards an older audience, as it is based on war and aggression, something a child should not play. This is resembled to the world as there is more complex visuals and more dark and dull colour schemes. This backs up the more mature and lifelike gameplay. The complexity can be shown through levolution in the maps. This levolution allows the player to change the state of the map, making both the world and the game more dynamic. The tone and mood of a game can drastically change the world. This happens in order to back up the game and inject some form of fear or happiness into the player. This can be shown in Alien Isolation, as the world, being dark and dim, works well with the gameplay and sounds to project fear into the player. This helps the gameplay as it makes the players more on edge and therefore terrified when something is to happen. However, this can also work oppositely. If we go back to Mario, the bright and simplistic world suggests to the player that the gameplay is going to be fun and not serious. This changes the world from dull and realistic to bright and simple. The world is created to back up the style and gameplay of the game to help give the player a more creditable experience. The game engine can change the game world in relation to the complexity of the world. An example of a complex world is Skyrim. They use a complex game engine as their world is extensive and open world and has a high visual impact to entice the player into the game due to its mature, lifelike feel. To show the opposite, FIFA uses a slightly less intense game engine, which is mostly used for the game's physics. The world of FIFA, therefore, is very similar in every football game you play. Although it is realistic, it is also simple. Some games have such extensive worlds that they have to create their own game engines to tailor their dynamic worlds. The platform the game has been released on will also affect the game's world. This is dependent on the specs of the hardware of the platform. For example, Sonic the Hedgehog was relatively early game, and many of its franchise was released on the Nintendo DS. This small device limited the diversity of the game world to a side-scrolling world, and it couldn't handle anything more. For example, For Honor, that is to be released on the more newer consoles such as the Xbox One and PlayStation 4, will be able to ask for more out of its game world, as the hardware in these consoles will be able to cope with much more, enabling the world to be more diverse. Secondly, I'm going to talk about how characters can differ in games. Most games include characters now, and some will be pointless without them. Although there are many purposes for characters in games, some of the main reasons are to firstly enhance the storyline. Characters enhance the gameplay as they help give the player a strong connection with the game. This helps with the storyline as it makes the player feel for the character, as though they are completing the game together and therefore wants to choose the best options for the character. This can be seen in GTA 5. Although you know that the character of Franklin isn't real, you are still wary when playing as him, as you fear his death. As well as this, when coming to the end of GTA, you have an option who to kill. Your connection with the character helps you to decide what option to choose. However, there are many characters that do not affect or enhance the game. NPCs, non-playable characters, are AI-based models that wander the world independently, despite what the player does. Although some NPCs can have a heavy role in the storyline, most of them are just in the game to create a more lifelike feel to the game, populating the world. These NPCs are designed to fit the style and genre of the game to make it a more realistic experience for the player. This would mean creating medieval NPC models for a game such as Assassin's Creed. The visual appearance of characters and NPCs are very important in improving the visual impacts of a game. The designers create these impacts by making character models that are tailored to the game style. This creates a more realistic experience to the player as it helps put them in the game. The character helps to set the scene in most games. This can benefit from if they have high visual impacts, as the player can see every expression on their face, as well as setting the mood of the game. Depending on the character's expressions, the player can change and diversify their gameplay to suit the situation. The appearance of the character can link into the behaviour and attitudes of the character. This, just like facial features, gives the player a sense of how the game is about to pan out, and how to change their style of gameplay to tailor these changes. The attitudes of a character can also contribute to any decision making, as it gives the player a genuine love or hatred towards a certain character, dependent on their behaviours. This means, given the option to shoot an unliked character, most players will take this opportunity. The attitudes and behaviour of a character can also alter a player's playstyle, as the personality of the character gives them different attributes and specialities, meaning all characters cannot be played the same way. In more recent games such as Saints Row III and Grand Theft Auto 5, characters are customizable. The customization has become very detailed, changing everything from the clothes they wear to their own facial features. This can improve the bond between player and character, as it is their creation and are therefore more careful with them. It is now so detailed, players can customize the characters to be themselves. This is a way of literally putting the player in the game, thus making their playstyle more cautious as they don't want to hurt themselves. Although NPCs are mainly used to populate the world, in few situations some NPCs are given the role of helping the main playable characters. This can be seen in Skyrim, when you get given a companion, Lydia. Lydia is an NPC, although customizable, her job is to follow you around and help in any conflicts you encounter. Despite that it may be taken away some sense of accomplishment as you have been helped out, it fills and exceeds this with a sense of teamwork, as if you have won the battle together and both the player and the companion has contributed towards it. This builds a bond between the two, and therefore has the player caring for the companion more than any other NPC. Because of this, NPCs are starting to become a bigger part in games. As I said earlier, NPCs were only used to populate the world, whereas now they are used for being allies and enemies, making them more important to the game. This has triggered game designers to put more effort into creating the NPCs, as they are a heavy part in a lot of games. As well as this, over the evolution of games and gaming systems, the AI level of NPCs has significantly increased, making them act more like players, improving the gameplay. This can be shown through a lot of first-person shooters, as now NPCs will take cover behind objects and try to show as little as their body as possible. This is a mass improvement from when NPCs would stand in the middle of a hallway asking to be shot. When coming to animate an NPC, there are a few different ways of doing it. Earlier games, due to the lack of hardware, used traditional methods such as 2D animating. This may have been because most games will have been 2D and therefore not required any 3D movement or animation from the characters and NPCs. This can be seen in most old platformers such as Donkey Kong and Mario. However, because of this lack of animation, player doesn't create a strong relationship with the character, as it isn't realistic. As games and gaming systems have grown over the years, we are almost always seeing 3D realistic games now. This begs for 3D lifelike character models to fit the game style. The players demand this as they expect more from games as they have evolved into more realistic games. Finally, motion capture has come onto the scene. This is where special cameras capture the action and movement of a real person, creating the movement of a 3D wire frame that the designers can work around to create player models that have lifelike movement and action. The user interface on a game is what information the game screen is displaying and feeding back to you, the player. This information can be anything from whereabouts you need to go to how many bullets are left in your magazine. Although this information is sometimes vital for the player to know, it is also seen to be less important than what the character can see. This means that when designing a user interface where the gameplay is more important, such as in CSGO, you have to make the information visible but small and not in immediate view, otherwise you will be blocking the player's vision. Most commonly found on the interface is a map. This, unlike other information, is similar on most game genres. Other more common information that is genre specific could include the bullet count, health, or what weapon you are wielding. All of these help to improve the gameplay and the awareness of the player. However, some game genres will not include this information on the user interface, as there is no need. Games such as Mario, a simple side-scroller, do not need to show how many bullets you have left, as it simply doesn't use weapons. Despite this, Mario does need to show how far through a level you are and how many lives you have left. 2D perspectives are seen in near to all side-scrolling games. Such as Terraria, 2D perspectives is where there is no depth to the character and environment. Although Terraria is a more recent game, it is often seen in older games as it is a simple perspective due to the fact that no 3D animation or modelling is required to create it. 3D perspectives are more complex and recent than 2D perspectives. This is because in more recent games, players expect realism from their game to give them the best experience when playing the game. This perspective can be seen in most newer games. For example, in Grand Theft Auto 5, there is depth to both character and the environment. This can be seen as you are able to examine a building from many different angles and heights, showing the 3D perspective. Along with 2D and 3D, there is first person and third person. This gives you a different view on your character. Some games have a fixed view, however, others can change and differ their view depending on the situation the player is in. For example, Euro Truck Simulator allows you to toggle between third and first person. This means that you can be in first person in order to gain a lifelike and real experience. Or, you can change to third person so that you have a better awareness of what is around your truck and whether you can fit through a tight space. This makes the game good for both types of players, those who take it seriously and need a realistic view, and those who want to play for fun and have a view that gives you more awareness of the environment you are in. Finally, full motion video was used for a very short while in the gaming industry. Although it looked like a good idea on paper, it wasn't so good in the game. FMV is where the game is made not using graphics, but like a film, people acting out the scene. This was a failure for a couple of reasons. First, it greatly limited the games. You could not change any aspect of it. This is because the only gameplay scene was pre-made and therefore cannot be changed. Because of this, the player had to follow a specific story every time that would never change. To add to this, FMV also failed as the graphical content was limited. If using graphics, you could make it so that a character had his arm blown off. However, the game company could not do this with real humans for obvious reasons, making the game less intense and taking away the ambience created by games.